Greg always made a show of loving transparency, until the morning he locked me out of the dashboard I built from scratch. No warning, no email, just a blinking access denied message like a digital middle finger. I sat there in my sad little corner cubicle, sipping lukewarm coffee, staring at the screen that used to hold every legal kill switch in the company. That system, CensuraCore, was my baby. I nursed it through 6 audits, 3 compliance sweeps, and 1 DOJ investigation that Greg still brags about dodging. Spoiler, he dodged it because of me. But now, suddenly I was the legacy friction slowing things down. That's what the new VP of Sales, Brandon, with his white sneakers and startup smirk, called me during a product sprint I wasn't even invited to. I only found out because someone left the meeting notes open on the printer tray. Real subtle. That was the day I started keeping hard copies of everything. I'm talking manila folders, color-coded tabs, backups of backups. You don't survive 15 years in corporate compliance without knowing when the walls are closing in. And buddy, the drywall was creaking. By week's end, my calendar looked like a ghost town. No team huddles, no cross-functional reviews. Even Greg, who used to call me our legal eagle when investors were around, suddenly stopped making eye contact in the break room. My badge still worked. My paycheck still landed. But professionally, I was already dead and buried. They just hadn't sent the obituary yet. And before I go on, just a tiny ask. If you've made it this far, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button and giving this story a like. 90% of you are just floating through these stories without following, and let me tell you, it means the world to the team behind the scenes. Keeps the coffee warm and the drama flowing. All right, back to it. So yeah, the vibes were off. I'd walk into meetings and people would suddenly get very interested in their phones. Slack messages would pop off with "Where's Janet?" like I didn't have eyes or ears. I'd been through restructures before, seen good people walk out with cardboard boxes and dignity in tatters. But this was different. It wasn't just a layoff brewing. It was a hit job in slow motion. Greg started going full LinkedIn influencer, posting selfies from the boardroom, rambling about leaning into risk. Meanwhile, I was rewriting our vendor onboarding policy for the 3rd time in 6 months because Brandon forgot that contracts still, exist. He'd literally signed a non-compliant CRM deal over beers at a golf tournament, then called me negative energy for flagging it. My whole job was risk mitigation. These clowns were treating legal exposure like a personality trait. It got worse. One Monday, I opened my inbox and found my team's access permissions had been downgraded. No admin rights, no edit access, just viewer mode on our own compliance repository. That's like handing a firefighter a squirt gun and saying good luck. I messaged IT, no response. I walked over. They shrugged and told me it came from above. By Wednesday, the rumors were growing legs. Someone overheard Greg talking about a clean break during a budget review. Someone else saw HR booking back-to-back meetings. My team was on edge, but I told them to keep their heads down. We'd seen this play before. What I didn't tell them was that I had already printed my original employment contract, scanned every system log, and triple-checked one very specific clause I had inserted years ago, Clause 7C. At the time, it was just legal paranoia. Protective footnote after a harassment claim I filed in 2016, one that Greg had helped settle quietly with a forced promotion and a fake apology over sushi. But that clause, it was my insurance policy. It tied any licensing, sale, or third-party usage of CensuraCore to my explicit, written sign-off. No exceptions, no substitutes. Nobody read the fine print anymore. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake, thinking I wouldn't remember it. They called it a vision alignment session. That's how you know you're about to get stabbed, in the back, in public, with PowerPoint transitions. The entire company crammed into the auditorium. Interns, engineers, sales bros in matching polo shirts, even the UX team that usually ghosted these things unless there were donuts. Greg strutted on stage like a game show host with a god complex. Lights dimmed. Pulsing synth tracks started playing like we were about to watch a Marvel trailer. Spoiler alert, the villain was already holding the mic. He opened with buzzwords, synergy, optimization, strategic clarity. The usual salad dressing for a plate of pink slips. Then came the slide, reimagining operations in a font so big it could have been seen from space. As we enter this next chapter, Greg said, voice syrupy, "You've identified some legacy structures that no longer align with our mission." Legacy structures. That's what they call departments that keep your ass out of prison. He paused for drama like he was announcing an Oscar. And then, effective immediately, our governance and compliance division will be sunset. Sunset, like we were a failing cruise line or a broken lamp. Then he looked right at me. Janet Wilson has done incredible work over the years. Her position is no longer required. He said it with that performative sorrow CEOs practice in front of mirrors. The kind of fake empathy you'd expect from a funeral home intern who just learned your grandma died, but can't pronounce her last name. The silence in the room was suffocating. People weren't sure if they should clap, cry, or call legal. One overeager junior manager started a slow clap, then stopped mid-slap when no one joined in. I stood there, not moving, not blinking, holding a pen I'd brought to take notes. HR was already walking toward me with a packet like they knew, like this was rehearsed, like they'd practiced the handoff. The packet was navy blue, classy, tacky, like a wedding invite from a couple that met a crypto retreat. Inside, severance terms, an NDA, a cheery exit checklist that included turn in your badge and smile during your departure interview. I didn't sit. I didn't speak. I just looked around. My team looked like someone had pulled the oxygen from the room. A couple of them had tears in their eyes. Not for me, okay, maybe a little, but for themselves. They knew what this meant. If they could erase me, the person who literally wrote the policies, they weren't safe either. Greg kept talking, something about leaner workflows and flattened hierarchies. I wasn't listening anymore. My ears were ringing, but not from shock, from rage, controlled, focused. Clinical, I walked out, slowly. No storming, no scene, just quiet steps across the tile floor of a company I'd helped build. In the hallway, I passed Brandon, the sales bro VP, and he had the nerve to wink at me. No hard feelings, right? I didn't answer. Just looked him up and down like I was performing an autopsy on poor taste and inherited incompetence. Back at my desk, everything had already changed. My monitors were locked. My chair was gone. I'm not kidding, they'd literally removed my chair. Like I was gonna roll away with trade secrets. But the joke was on them. The secrets were already in my head and locked in a clause no one else remembered. Clause 7C. I dropped the HR packet into my bag like a dirty dish towel, took my little cactus plant, my framed photo of my cat next to a gavel, and walked straight past the lobby security without looking back. Greg had made one fatal assumption, that this was a resignation. He didn't realize it was a trigger. I got home and dropped the navy blue exit folder on my kitchen counter like it was radioactive. It looked so smug sitting there next to the fruit bowl, like it thought it had won. Like it had wrapped up my career in one last passive-aggressive brochure. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I fed the cat, kicked off my flats, made a grilled cheese with the kind of mechanical precision you develop when you've spent 15 years parsing SEC audit trails for breakfast. Then I poured a glass of wine and opened the cabinet above the fridge. That's where I kept the real archive. 3 binders, labeled by year, tucked between an old crock pot and a box of just-in-case resumes I hadn't updated since Obama was in office. The second binder was thicker than the others, 2016. That was the year it happened. Greg called it a miscommunication. HR called it a boundary misunderstanding. What it actually was a corner office groping in a locked meeting room that ended with me pushing his sweaty hand off my hip and slamming my badge into his chest. I threatened to file formal charges. He offered me a raise, said we could reset the tone. I took the raise, but I didn't forget. Instead, I made a phone call. Spent 3 weeks consulting a friend of a friend attorney who specialized in executive entrenchment clauses. I wasn't an executive, but I was the architect of the single most irreplaceable thing Censura Tech had ever built, CensuraCore. So I wrote Clause 7C into my retention agreement. In the event that the CensuraCore platform, entirely or in part, is sold, licensed, merged, or otherwise operationalized by a third-party entity, continued legal use shall require the signature and written consent of the original system architect, hereafter named as Janet Wilson. They signed it. Greg didn't even read it, just nodded like he was doing me a favor. I had the scanned PDF, the notarized backup, the email thread with legal, and most importantly, the metadata timestamp from the day it was filed into our internal contract repository. All of it sitting right there in my binder. I found the printed copy, still crisp, highlighted in yellow, initialed in pen. I sat back in my kitchen chair and smiled for the first time all day. Not a big smile, not the kind that says victory, more like the smile of someone who sees a lightning storm forming and already has the umbrella patent. Greg thought he'd erased me with a slide deck and a fake applause break. What he actually did was trigger a legally binding landmine. And the best part, it already started walking across it. I opened my laptop, logged into an old, still working Gmail, typed up a short message. Subject, Legacy Compliance Clause, friendly reminder to one person, Emily Clark, legal counsel, M in a division, Clearwell Acquisitions. She'd been an intern under me years ago. Smart, nervous, brilliant with contract law. I once taught her how to spot bad indemnity language while we split fries in the break room. She was now in the big leagues, and I knew she'd be combing through every line of the deal with surgical precision. I kept the email short. Hey M, hope you're well. Just a quick ping in case you're reviewing the CensuraCore usage rights. Clause 7C in my old retention file might be of interest. P.S. Let me know if you still eat those awful vinegar chips. J, no threats, no drama, just a breadcrumb. If she was half as sharp as I remembered, she'd find it. If not, someone else would. Because here's the thing about compliance systems like CensuraCore, they don't just store data, they store decisions. Every field, every function, every integration, mapped and logged. And all of it, every line of code they were so eager to parade around in their pitch decks, carried my fingerprint. Greg had fired the one person whose name legally unlocked the software they were trying to sell for $250 million. I closed the laptop. The fuse had been lit. Greg always loved a camera. Didn't matter if it was a CNBC puff piece or a local podcast recorded in some guy's garage next to a vintage pinball machine. If there was a mic and an audience, Greg was there, grinning like a politician at a pancake breakfast. Now that the $250 million merger with Clearwell was in flight, he was everywhere. Centura Tech is leaner than ever, he told Tech Axis. We've streamlined redundant departments and positioned ourselves for a compliance-light future. Compliance-light. That phrase hit harder than the vodka I'd once downed in an airport lounge after redlining 130 pages of SEC guidance overnight. He was talking about my team, my life's work, my code, my policy frameworks, my review processes, all bundled into a neat euphemism for disposable. But here's what Greg didn't know. I hadn't left the system. Not really. CensuraCore wasn't a piece of software you could just unplug and replace like an expired coffee machine. It was a spiderweb of dependencies, mapped into every legal document, every vendor relationship, every single flag-triggered automation that kept them from falling off a regulatory cliff. It was built by a paranoid woman with a memory for vendettas and a hobby of reading federal case law on Saturday nights. So yeah, Greg could change the passwords. He could remove my badge, but the code was still mine. The documentation still pointed back to my name. And the clause 7C, it was like embedding a tripwire in a hallway no one thought they'd ever walk again until they did. Meanwhile, my inbox stayed quiet. Emily didn't reply to the email I sent, not immediately, but I could see when she opened it, twice, then a third time. I had a pixel tracker embedded in the footer, old habit. She clicked the PDF attachment, stayed on the clause page for over 4 minutes, then nothing, that was good. Silence in legal land, that meant gears were turning. I stayed off LinkedIn, didn't check Glassdoor. My phone buzzed a few times from old colleagues, so sorry. Can't believe they did that to you, and let me know if you're looking. We'd kill for a compliance lead, but I didn't answer. Not yet. I wasn't job hunting. I was ghost hunting, and the ghost was me. Somewhere in a high-rise downtown, a deal team was poring over the guts of Centura Tech, document by document, policy by policy. And sooner or later, someone, Emily or some other junior lawyer with insomnia and a red pen, was going to hit clause 7C. They'd pause, look it over, Google me, and then they'd ask, wait, where's Janet Wilson? At that point, the timeline would split. Path A, they realize too late after contracts are signed and someone goes to validate platform rights. Boom, deal violation, major liability. Path B, they find it just in time. Hit the brakes, reassess everything. Put Greg's pretty little merger in a pressure cooker. Either way, I win. Because here's the thing about building systems that keep companies out of jail. When they fire you and try to cash out your work, they never realize you are the firewall. They think you're just the person who wrote the rules. They forget you also wrote the locks. And somewhere behind Greg's shiny merger decks and his smug PR tour, I could hear the locks beginning to click. It started as a whisper, one of those corporate murmurs that doesn't show up in meeting minutes but spreads like printer toner on sweaty fingers. Greg brushed it off the first time, some comment from the CFO about legal circling back on systems access. Nothing that couldn't be smoothed over with a buzzword and a lunch. But then came the follow-up. A flagged note from the M and a team at Clearwell. Need clarification on legacy platform licensing? CensuraCore. Specific terms around transferability. Greg scoffed, rolled his eyes, and forwarded it to some poor intern in business ops with a 2-line message. Dig into this, probably just old fluff. I don't have time for legacy nonsense. I could practically hear the arrogance dripping off the email from my couch. Legacy nonsense. That nonsense had more legal teeth than a shark tank, and it was written in my exact tone, tight, boring, and utterly merciless. I knew how this would play out. The intern, bless their clueless little soul, would open our internal archive system. They'd type in CensuraCore licensing. They'd find dozens of folders. Vendor permissions, third-party addenda, policy PDFs with names like Platform Compliance Authority, V2 Final Really Final PDF. They'd dig and dig, clicking deeper, wondering why it wasn't just a simple boilerplate clause like the others. And then they'd hit the retention files, the ones no one had touched in years. The ones that required elevated access, which had never been revoked for one reason. Nobody remembered they existed. That's where Clause 7C lived, buried, quiet, unimpressed. By the time they found it, Emily had already beaten them to it. She didn't write a long reply, didn't call, didn't send over a formal alert or kick off a Slack frenzy. Just a 1-line email, no subject line, no sign-off, found it. That's all she needed to say. I sat there staring at the message. My phone screen dimmed. I didn't blink. I didn't smile, stone-faced. That's what 15 years in compliance does to you. You learn to hide the celebration until the audit's over and the room is cleared. Meanwhile, Greg was hosting another fireside chat on Zoom, this one for the sales department. He was practically glowing, talking about vision post-merger and how Centura Tech was finally shedding its baggage. Baggage. That's what he called the departments he gutted. That's what he called me. I watched the replay someone uploaded to the internal drive out of morbid curiosity. He ended with the buyers thrilled. We've delivered every doc ahead of schedule. Legal's just doing their thing, it's all procedural now. All procedural now. Somewhere, a red pen was underlining my name. Someone was writing a comment bubble. Who is the architect referenced here? And the deeper they read, the worse it got. Clause 7C wasn't just a sticky note on a policy. It was a legal clause cross-referenced in 5 separate appendices, each of which included operational triggers, fallback conditions, and, in one gloriously overlooked subclause, the phrase shall not be nullified by termination of employment status. That's the one Emily probably reread twice, because that line meant Greg's little going-away party for me didn't deactivate anything. All it did was activate me. Back in the office, someone from contracts pinged Greg with a follow-up. Can we confirm signatory access for the original system architect? Buyer legal is pushing for name. Greg didn't answer, not because he was nervous, not yet, because he still didn't know the answer, or worse, he thought he did. He assumed the answer was nobody. The truth, the answer was me. The company rented out the 42nd floor of the Caraway building downtown for what they called the pre-close mixer. It had skyline views, a sushi chef flown in from Vancouver, and enough corporate smugness to trigger a tax audit just by walking through the lobby. Greg wore a navy blue suit so tight it looked like it was holding in his ego with compression. He toasted with mocktails and Veuve, bragging to the interns about legacy simplification, and telling some guy from recruiting once this closes we're set for life. Set for life. Sure. Inside the penthouse suite, Clearwell's due diligence team worked out of a quieter, less Instagrammable corner of the floor, 3 people hunched over thick binders and dual monitors. No champagne, no sushi. Just laptops, sticky notes, and an undercurrent of unease they hadn't quite put their fingers on yet. The atmosphere out front was pure pageantry. Branded coasters, ice sculptures, custom cookies shaped like the company logo. You'd never guess that behind the velvet curtain, someone was quietly flipping pages looking for one specific line of text that would determine if the whole celebration was premature. Me, I wasn't on the guest list. Greg made sure of that, but I walked past the building anyway. It was raining, just enough to smear the streetlights into watercolor blurs. I wore a hooded coat, the kind that makes you invisible in a city full of people trying too hard to be seen. I didn't go in, didn't look up. I just walked past the revolving doors, slow and steady, like I didn't care what was happening 42 floors above me. But I did, not because I wanted revenge. I wanted recognition, not applause, not speeches, just a quiet acknowledgement in a room full of people who once applauded my erasure. She built this, and now we can't move forward without her. Back in my apartment, the lights were dim. My laptop was closed. The wine was untouched. I sat by the window with a legal pad in my lap, watching headlights crawl through the rain below like a slow-motion evacuation. The clock ticked. The documents were being signed. Inside that high-rise, the integration paperwork was laid out across a walnut conference table with a view of the city stretching into fog. The buyer's lead counsel, a wiry man named Mark with more red ink pens than facial expressions, was combing through Exhibit 14, platform transfer and licensing provisions. His associate had flagged something 3 days ago, Clause 7C. It was buried in a supplemental file. Indexed but unverified, they hadn't circled back yet. Greg assumed all boxes were checked. The mood board for his post-merger vision video was already drafted, but the fuse was still burning. At that moment, I wasn't watching. I wasn't interfering. I had done everything I needed to. I'd made my move, a single line of code buried in bureaucracy, a clause no one could overwrite without a time machine and my permission. What they didn't realize was that this wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was a countdown. The mood shifted with the sharpness of a paper cut. One moment, Greg was holding court over a tray of crab cakes, bragging about vision synergy and how Clearwell's team was eating out of our hands. The next, paralegal from the buyer's side whispered something into their counsel's ear mid-signature. Mark, the buyer's lead lawyer, froze mid-initial. You could almost hear the click of his pen stopping above the dotted line. Before we proceed, he said, calm as a surgeon, there's a clause I need confirmed. Came up late during cross-referencing. Greg rolled his eyes, already annoyed that someone was questioning the glorious final act of his one-man business opera. Let me guess, he said. Some IT footnote? Mark didn't smile. He flipped to the flagged page and slid it across the table. One sentence had been highlighted in yellow. Just one. Use of the CensuraCore platform by any acquiring or integrating entity requires the express written authorization of the original system architect, Janet Wilson, regardless of employment status or tenure. Mark tapped the line. This clause. Section 7C. Can we confirm this has been fulfilled? Greg scoffed like a man who still believed the rules were for other people. She doesn't work here anymore, he snapped. Fired her weeks ago. No hesitation. No concern. Just that same lazy smugness he'd worn the day he handed me my exit packet like a party favor. Mark didn't blink. Yes, I see that. But the clause isn't voided by termination. In fact, it specifically states that her authorization is required post-acquisition. There's no substitution mechanism. Someone at the table, the CFO maybe, shifted in his seat. Another exec cleared their throat. Greg laughed, the kind of strained chuckle people use when they're realizing the joke might be on them. So what? We delay the deal because some former department head forgot to rubber stamp a form before she stormed out? Mark's tone was flat. This isn't optional. The clause is enforceable under contract law and recognized by our legal framework. If we acquire the company without the signature, the core compliance platform becomes unusable. Worse, any integrations performed without her sign-off could expose us to retroactive liability. Now that got their attention. Greg leaned forward. Are you serious? As a seizure, Mark replied. The room fell quiet. Someone pulled up the original agreement on a laptop. Someone else started searching Slack messages for anything from me that might resemble authorization. They found nothing, because I hadn't sent anything, not a word, not a whisper. I hadn't authorized Jack. Greg muttered, she's just trying to screw us. No, Mark said, she protected her work. You ignored the contract. Greg looked around the room for support and found none. The sales VP checked his phone like it might rescue him. HR shifted nervously. The Clearwell exec stared, blank and cold, suddenly recalculating everything. Greg rubbed his temples. So what do you want me to do? Call her? Apologize? Mark didn't answer. He just closed the binder and said, we don't move forward without her signature. That's when Greg finally understood. This wasn't a bluff. It wasn't a speed bump. It was the wall. And he'd just walked into it at full speed, champagne flute still in hand. The closing room was designed for celebration, floor-to-ceiling glass, gold-lettered folders, and a long mahogany table polished to a mirror shine. Everything was curated, the branded pens, the catered pastries, the stack of ceremonial champagne bottles waiting patiently in ice buckets. Greg had made sure of that. This was supposed to be the photo op moment, the handshakes, the signatures, the flashbulb smiles. But instead, Mark, the buyer's lawyer, paused with the calm of a man about to deliver a biopsy result. He didn't raise his voice, didn't wave papers around, just slowly reached into the stack, pulled out the now infamous binder labeled Exhibit 14, flipped to a tab marked Clause 7C and slid it, silent as a guillotine, across the table to the acquiring CEO. The room went still. The CEO, Derek Lang, a man known for his poker face during billion-dollar takeovers, adjusted his glasses and read the paragraph, once, then again, and then a third time. His hand didn't tremble, his voice didn't crack. But when he finally looked up, his face was no longer composed. It was white, like printer paper, like fear. Greg, he said slowly, deliberately, did you fire the only person who can legally authorize the system? Greg opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The CFO leaned in. Wait, what does that mean? Can't we just override it? Mark answered before Greg could. No. The clause specifically says that use of the CensuraCore platform in any capacity requires Janet Wilson's written authorization. It doesn't matter if she's employed. There's no clause allowing substitution or waiver. The room thickened with silence. Greg blinked hard. She was part of the legacy team. Mark cut in. She's also the original architect. The clause is clear. Her signature is legally required for us to operate the core system post-acquisition. Without it, we're buying a product we can't legally use. One of Clearwell's senior advisors ran a hand through his hair. Another muttered something under his breath. The internal counsel looked like he was mentally recalculating every liability exposure from the last 3 weeks. Greg sat back in his chair, jaw slack. I didn't think it mattered, he said quietly. She was compliance. Exactly. Derek replied, she was compliance. From across town, I sat in my living room, a cup of tea cooling beside me as my email pinged softly. Subject, request for signature authorization CensuraCore licensing from Derek Lang to Janet Wilson. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I opened a tab and pulled up the livestream link a junior engineer had quietly sent me, someone who still remembered what I'd done for that company before Greg started scrubbing my name from the record. The camera was shaky, muted. Someone's phone propped on a water glass, but I could see the room, the frozen expressions, the realization settling like a fog. Greg was staring straight ahead, lips pressed thin, a man doing math on how fast a reputation can fall apart. And I watched, calm, distant, still, letting the silence do the talking. The pen hovered midair. Derek Lang, CEO of Clearwell, a man known for closing 8-figure deals over breakfast, held it like it was loaded. His hands shook, slightly at first, then enough that the intern beside him quietly pushed the pen tray back out of reach. No, he whispered, not to anyone in particular, not with anger, just realization. Oh my God. The words landed with a dull thud. Everyone understood. Without my signature, the system didn't transfer. Without the system, the acquisition was worthless. Without the acquisition, Greg had just promised $250 million of vaporware to a buyer with a legal team sharp enough to fillet whales. And now the sharks were circling. Across the table, Mark slowly closed the binder and tapped it once as if sealing a coffin. This clause isn't an oversight, he said. It's enforceable. It was executed, notarized, and buried intentionally. We missed it. She didn't. Greg's mouth flapped open. No words, just breathe and panic. He reached for his phone like it was a life vest in open water, searched my name, probably fumbled the spelling. Probably remembered too late that my work email had been deactivated, that HR had erased me from the Slack workspace, that it had flagged my account as offboarded successfully. But I'd already seen the missed call attempt. One ring, declined. Then came the second message, this time to my personal inbox. Line of desperation wrapped in performative calm. Hey Janet, would love to reconnect for quick clarification on some system documentation. Let me know when you're free. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new email, typed slowly, precisely. My fingers didn't tremble. Subject, System Access Clarification from Janet Wilson to Derek Lang CC, Mark Phelps, M. and illegal Derek. This email serves as my formal notice of non-cooperation. Actions taken by Censura Tech leadership have voided my goodwill, my involvement, and any willingness to re-engage. Please consult the attached clause for further legal clarity. Regards, Janet Wilson. I hit send, then closed the laptop. No celebration, no bottle pop, just the quiet hum of a heater in my apartment and the soft click of a decision locking into place. Back at the high-rise, Greg's face wasn't red. It was white. No shouting, no rage, just stillness. He looked like a man staring at a wreckage he hadn't seen coming because he was too busy waving to the cameras. Around him, no one moved. The buyer's team quietly packed up their documents. Phones buzzed with calendar cancellations. The VP of sales tried to slip out unnoticed, like a rat abandoning a yacht that had just hit a reef made entirely of arrogance. Everyone knew, they wouldn't say it aloud. Not yet, maybe not ever. But the look in their eyes said it all. She did this. Janet Wilson, the woman they cut without ceremony, without thanks, without so much as a second glance, was the one who built the system. And the one who just froze it, not out of revenge, out of principle. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.